Okay. So there's a couple of things I wanted to share with you for the induction this afternoon. Kelly, can you do me a favor? Can you just confirm whether you can see that on your screen, please? Okay, so hopefully then the PowerPoint is visible. So croeso then, welcome to what is the induction session for the third ALN module, Anghenion Dysgu Ychwanegol Ragoriaeth Mewn Ymarfer, or ALN Excellence in Practice. And the aim of this session then realistically is to give kind of a brief overview and outline in terms of an induction as to what the module is about, in particular what the assignment looks like and where you will find information both on Canvas and PebblePad. All of you then have done one of the modules previously. So some of you in the group have done the Inclusive Classroom Practice module. Some of you in the group have done the Leadership and Management of ALN module. And you will find that this module hopefully then builds onto whichever module you studied previously in slightly different ways. So starting off then, just a quick introduction once again to the teaching team for this module. Now, whichever module you've done previously, you will have seen that the majority, if not all, of the members of staff on the screen. And again, it will be delivered in a similar way where different staff across the 7 universities will be leading on different sessions during the conference Saturdays. So just as a quick recap, we've got Rhiannon from Cardiff Met, we've got Alison and Nana from Trinity St David's, Carmel from University of South Wales, myself then from Swansea, we've got Megan from Aberystwyth, we've got Anne who's from Cardiff Met, Fliss from Bangor, and Laura from Wrexham University. So at various points during the 2 national conference Saturdays, you will see a combination of us on screen leading those kind of reflective sessions on the day. So the aim for this induction session then, so in particular, we'll think a little bit about the national conference days. Again, these are not new now to you, but just to kind of recap the format of those and the dates. And in particular, what I wanted to do is go through the assignment with you and where you'll find information. So just as a reminder, then you have access to different versions of this module, both on Canvas and on PebblePad. And again, similarly then to your first module on Canvas, Canvas is the Swansea University VLE. This is what you will access with your Swansea student login details. And this is where you will find the kind of the weekly prompts to keep on track, any Swansea specific information about when we've got drop-in sessions and the links to those, for example. And this will be where you will submit your final assignment on the 29th of August. On PebblePad then, as a reminder, PebblePad you will access through your Education Workforce Council website, and you will need your EWC work login details and password to access that. If you haven't had a chance to do that as yet, when you go into EWC, you will need to click on the Resources tab, and you'll need to make sure that you've got the ALN Excellence in Practice module in that resource section. And I'll go through and show you a little bit later on what we've got on Canvas and PebblePad. So as a reminder then, the module will work the same as your previous one. We've got 2 national conference sessions, one in June and one in July. And both of those conference sessions will take place on Teams, and the outline of those days and the links will be available closer to the time. And then we have a number of optional drop-in sessions for our group in Swansea. And what I envisage going forward realistically is that we will have 4 drop-in sessions between now and the end of your school term in July. And then we will also continue and put in at least 4 other assignment drop-in sessions, which will take us through the end of July and going into August as well. So I think we are expected to have 2 Swansea-specific drop-in sessions. Realistically, we would be closer to 8 sessions by the time we finish the module. When you take a look at Canvas at some point this week or next week, you will find there is a Padlet that I'm going to ask you to share some details on a little bit later on. And one of the questions that's up on there that I'd like you to populate is what days and times of the week work best for you, or at the very least are the least worst times for you initially between now and schools breaking up. So what I'd like to do to kind of maximize people's opportunity to attend is look to see what days and times work best. So I will ask you as a group to kind of populate that over the next week or so. So just as a reminder then, the National Conference Saturday sessions, the first one we have coming up on the 22nd of June, and the second one is on the 13th of July. And as a rough outline in terms of the timings, they very much will follow the timings that you've had before. So we will aim to start at 9:30 with a welcome session and an introduction to the assignment, for example. We will then look at 2 of the core strands that you'll have been working towards on the day. So core strands 1 and 2 and the first conference in June, and then core strands 3 and 4 on the second conference in July. And we will look then to kind of sum up the day at the end with examples of key points that have come out from discussions. And as previously, we will have an Ask the Expert session in the middle of the day, and again, details of who the speakers will be and their backgrounds and what they will be sharing, we will share with you closer to the time. So just something we'll pick up again later on, really. Now, all of you did well in terms of your first assignment, regardless of which module you did. So well done in terms of that. And I would say the marks that you'd scored previously would suggest that you are well aware of how to be successful. But again, key points to think about. Look back at your marked assignments, take a look at any feedback. Were there any particular comments for areas of improvement? Were there areas linked to referencing, citation, critical writing, for example, that you might want to build on going forward? So any questions so far? I think we leave questions to a little bit later on, if that's okay. So on the Padlet that I mentioned earlier on, there is the opportunity to post a little bit about yourself. Now, I'm not expecting anyone to share their life story or to share anything that you don't want people knowing about you, but it would be nice, as some of you haven't met each other before, just to give a little bit of outline as to who you are, what type of setting that you work in, for example. And it'll also ask you to think a little bit about, do you have any concerns about the module? So it could be, I'm okay with the module, but I'm really conscious about the fact that I got 2 modules coming in on the same day in August. So I'm a little bit concerned about how I'm going to manage my time, for example. And is there anything in particular that you'd like to get out of the module? Okay, and that will help hopefully inform some of the discussions that we can have during those drop-in sessions. So the key thing that you may be interested in at the moment, realistically, is what does the assignment look like and what does it ask you to do? Now, this assignment, the feedback from last year's group was quite favourable in the end, in terms of what they were asked to do. And again, the key comment that kind of came out was, do you know what, it doesn't look quite so bad in practice once you get into it compared to what the guidance looks like. So the assignment will ask you to critically evaluate the provision for ALN in your current setting and to develop an action plan to overcome barriers to inclusive practice. Now, we've got the word current in there, for example. Those of you who did the Inclusive Classroom Practice module, it was possible that you might have talked about practice that was in a previous setting as well as where you were working at the time. So the expectation with this module would be that you would be talking about practice within the setting that you are working in between now and the end of the summer term, realistically. Okay, so the assignment is nominally 4,000 words in length, and we will see the first part is 2,500 written words, and the second part of the assignment is a 1,500 word equivalent presentation. Both of these pieces of work will be submitted on a single Word document, and the expectation is the first part will be written onto the Word document, and the second part, which is the presentation, you will embed a hyperlink, which will take us to the presentation that you record. So going through the assignment then in a little bit more detail. So part 1 then asks you to do an audit. And again, I'll go through this audit word shortly, which asks you to identify effective practices in your setting for whole school inclusive approaches. So in previous assignments, for example, you might have been talking about strategies that you, particularly as a practitioner, were using to support a particular learner or group of learners in your setting. This assignment is asking you to focus on a whole school or whole unit approach in terms of what you're doing. And in particular, it's asking you to focus on practices that are already effective. So a good way of thinking about this module and assignment potentially might be to consider reflecting upon what is it that your setting is already doing well, so what is good, and what potentially could be done to support that good practice to become excellent. Okay, so you're going to identify some form of effective or good practice, however that's identified or measured within your setting, and you are going to consider then what is that practice, how could that be improved, are there particular barriers to exist on improving that as a whole school level, and how might those barriers be overcome. So that's the first part. The second part then is an online presentation of findings with analysis of key challenges which create barriers to whole setting approaches, and will ask you to reflect upon skills, action strategies that would be needed to engage and challenge key stakeholders. Now, this presentation is 1,500 words equivalent. The key metric we're looking at here is that your presentation will be 12 minutes in length. So there is no expectation that within your presentation, which will involve some PowerPoint slides, for example, that you have 1,500 words, written on there. But the 12 minutes has been viewed as being equivalent to 1,500 words. And again, I'll go through this in more detail shortly. So going back then to part 1, which is the audit. Now, last year, some practitioners in the course were a little bit concerned about what was meant by the word audit. If we think about the word audit, audit sometimes feels like it's something that's formal. It feels like maybe there's observations in practice involved. This assignment is not asking you to do anything like that. Maybe a better way of phrasing the word audit is to think about a reflection on practice. Okay, you may want to gather data that's available within your setting if there is evidence of such data, and this data shows that practice is effective. But again, there is no expectation that you have to do that. So the first part of the audit / reflection on practice is 500 words in length. And this then is where you will introduce yourself and your role in your setting. You will provide some key information about the context of where you work and also what it is you're going to discuss. And you will provide a general overview of current ALN provision and ethos within your setting. So 500 words or so setting the scene as to who you are, where do you work, what type of cohort of learners do you support, what seems to be going well currently, and what might be improved to take it from good to excellent. So that would be the first part of the audit / reflection on practice. In the assignment guidance and rubric that I'll show you, that's up on Pebble Pad and Canvas later on, you will see that there is a grid which has been slightly filled in to give you an example. Now, it does say on the guidance that you might find it useful to record the audit on the grid. Okay, so it says grid below, but the grid that's in the assessment rubric on Pebble Pad and Canvas. When we look at that grid shortly, I would say potentially completing your assignment using that grid is a little bit challenging. However, taking the subheadings of the different columns that are in the grid would be a really useful way of setting out your information. Okay, your audit is suggested that it is SMART, so you will be setting some specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound targets going forward to take practice from good or effective up to excellent. You will need to make links to literature, legislation and policy, and you might want to potentially critique some of the targets. Are there potential advantages or disadvantages in terms of the setting out to achieve those? So again, a very brief overview as to what the first part of the assignment looks like. Again, I'll show you this in a bit more detail when I show you what's on the Canvas page shortly. So the second part of the assignment then is a presentation. And this is a 12-minute presentation. You should have a PowerPoint to support this. And kind of like what we're doing at the moment, realistically, you will record yourself talking over your PowerPoint presentation. The expectation would be that you would have somewhere between 4 and 8 slides. However, you can also add a title slide and a reference slide outside of that number as well. So you might have 4 slides, but also have a cover slide and a reference slide either side of those. So within your presentation, you will give an overview of the findings from your audit, and you will start to think a little bit more now about the challenges to making change or affecting practice on a whole setting basis. You will also reflect upon skills and actions and strategies that you might need to engage and challenge key stakeholders to make these changes going forward. So who might be involved? What might some of the difficulties be? How can these barriers or difficulties be overcome, for example? So just wanted to go through the marking criteria as well. And in terms of the marking criteria, you can see that 5% of the marks is based on your academic writing skills and referencing. So a relatively small amount of marks is linked to that aspect. However, that is still an important area, as it may well be the difference between being in a distinction and a merit, or between a pass and a merit, for example. And you can see there is a relative parity in terms of what marks are given for both part 1 and part 2 of the assignment. So part 1, the audit, identifying practice, and then your action plan, thinking about how you might take good practice up to excellent, equates to 45% of the marks overall. Part 2, then your presentation, reflecting upon the challenges and barriers and how to overcome those and the skills and strategy needed, is worth 50%. So relative parity in terms of the marks for the different sections. In terms of the assessment process itself, as a reminder, then you have 2 attempts at an assessment per module. So if life happened and the worst came to the worst and you didn't achieve the 50% pass mark in your first attempt, you would have a second attempt, for example, but any second attempt is capped at 50. And as a reminder, in terms of the grade boundaries, anything that scores between 50 to 59 is classed as a pass, 60 to 69 is a merit, and anywhere between 70 and 100% is classed as a distinction. and the final assignment will be submitted on the 29th of August by 1 minute to midnight. So just towards the end of your summer holidays, and it's the week that the August bank holiday happens to fall in as well. So that's a little bit of information about the assignments. Don't think there was any real issues or concerns with anyone in the group in terms of citations and referencing previously. However, if this is something that you'd like to pick up on again, then there is support available on Canvas and links to the library services, for example, which goes through the Harvard referencing and citation system. And if there is anything you'd like to ask in terms of additional support for that, then please just let me know. And then again, we've seen this slide before in your first module. Realistically, what are the things that we can do to try and make sure that your assignment is as successful as it can be? So key issues around not delaying writing your assignment until the last moment. I know you have a challenge over the summer in that you have the ARES module pretty much coming in around the same time as well. And therefore, this is going to be important in terms of managing your time between those two different modules. Equally, having that critical friend who can take a look at an assignment and kind of give you some general feedback is useful. Again, we will try and build that into our drop-in sessions going forward to offer some peer support if people in the group are happy to share what they've written. Make sure that you've got enough time to edit and polish your work and look at things like ensuring your final reference list is appropriate. And then think a little bit more about engaging in the sessions where you can. And if you do have any questions or concerns, then please just ask. So at that point then, this is all I wanted to share in terms of the PowerPoint slides itself. Does anyone have any questions at that point before I move on and just draw your attention to a couple of things that are on PebblePad and Canvas? Okay, if you do have questions and you'd rather wait until we've finished recording and ask them later, that is also fine. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing at that point. And then, as I said, what I want to do now is just to give you a quick overview as to what is available on PebblePad and also on Canvas. So I'm going to start off with what's on PebblePad. So hopefully, again, you can see this being shared on your screen. Now, this then will take you to the module on PebblePad. Hopefully this is what it looks like for you. When I log on to this as a tutor, it looks slightly different. So I've put this into preview mode so that you can see what's there. Now, again, the layout of the module will look very, very similar to the previous one you've done and also similar to ARES. So again, we've got the 4 core strands, for example, and you can see for each of these core strands, we've got an introduction, and then we've either got 2, 3, or 4 substrands. And I'll go through those in a moment where we'll find those reflective activities. You can also see on here that there is a resources archive. So this module did run last year as well. And you can see here, for example, what happened on the first national conference. So these were the PowerPoints and resources and recordings that people looked at. We will populate those for this year as that information is available. And we can see at the bottom here of the resources section, you can see there's a little bit of information about the assignment. And there is also a hyperlink there, which will take you to what the assignment brief and the marking criteria looks like as well. Okay, so I just wanted to mention a couple of points in terms of the core strands. So the first one in core strand 1, again, we've got a bit of an introduction here. And I just wanted to draw your attention to this phrase at the bottom, realistically. Okay, so what you will find as we go through to try and help you in the summer when you're looking for resources to support some of your discussion, where we've mentioned citations within the body of PebblePad, where links were available for these, we've hyperlinked them. When you go through, it might look like there's an awful lot of activities that you're expected to read because of the hyperlinks. So what I would say as you go through, there is an expectation that you read anything that's linked or listed as being a directed activity. But where there are hyperlinks that are kind of embedded within the general discussion, those very much are optional. And those are there to give you a head start in terms of looking for literature to support your discussion going forward. So in other words, to save you some time in August when you're looking for literature to back up the points you've said, we've already put some links on here for you that you can use. So again, no expectation that you have to open up and read every hyperlink, but there is an expectation that you would be doing the readings which are linked to directed activities. Okay, so hopefully that helps managing expectations and workload going forward. So again, you can see the pages look very similar. And just to give you an idea on this paragraph here, for example, you can see that we've got 3 hyperlinks that are embedded within the text. We've got another one in the next paragraph. There is no expectation that you have to open up those and read through them, but they are there if you want to. Okay. At the bottom of that page, though, activity 4, this is a directed activity. Therefore, there would be an expectation that you read that one. Okay, so comparing that to previous modules where you had course strands where maybe there's 1 or 2 readings on a page, this one now looks like there's 12 things you have to read. Realistically, there is only 1 or 2 that's expected, and the rest are there for further support. Okay, so over the next week or so, can you please take a look at PebblePad and just make sure that you've got access to the module itself. You should find it under the Resources tab when you log into EWC. And again, the module is called ALN, Excellence in Practice. And looking at my resources, for example, you will see that it is got the code M11. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing because I'm going to come out of PebblePad. So hopefully that was clear in terms of what's up on there. So the second thing I wanted to show you was what's on Canvas. So again, PebblePad, you log into that with your EWC work account details. Canvas then is Swansea specific. So when you log into Canvas, this is what you see. So again, looks slightly different for me as a tutor. So I've put this into student mode. So hopefully this is what you can see when you go on. And what you will see in particular, we have a course overview. And if you scroll down through the course overview, it gives you a little bit of information about what the aims and the outcomes are for the module. You will see that there is a module handbook on there. Currently, the timetable doesn't have a hyperlink document, as I'd like to kind of build that timetable with you as a group once you've got the time to tell me what days and times kind of work best for you. So we will kind of build that timetable together as a group rather than me trying to impose one on you. And then you will see there's a bit of information here about the assignment and the marking rubric. And again, a reminder, 4,000 word assignment due in on the 29th of August. Okay. Just going through some other bits and pieces. So again, you've seen me before. That's not a particularly exciting page, but we've got some contact details and who you might want to contact if you have issues, if I wasn't available or if the issue was about me, for example. Little bit more information about academic support. So clicking on here will take you to the library guides and all the information about Harvard referencing styles, for example. Information here that takes you to the Centre for Academic Success, where you can access study skills support, with which you are able to do so if you feel that that is something that you would find useful. Some information here relating to kind of mental health and well-being. So again, some links on there. And then if you'd like to find out a little bit more about how to use Canvas, if you're a little bit reluctant or not sure, then there is kind of a training module that you can look at there. Now, the key thing I wanted to show you, realistically, you should see when you go onto Canvas, there is a section called What is the Assignment? And you will see that I've kind of put this brief introduction on here again. I will populate that bit here with dates when we are have decided on those. So just to break that information down and a little bit further for you, section 1, then the audit. What is good practice, but what could be done to make it better or make it excellent? And what are some of the barriers and challenges to that? And then the presentation then is looking at recapping some of those key findings and thinking about how those barriers and challenges could be overcome and what skills and strategies might be needed to do so, including engaging and challenging key stakeholders. So, going through the two parts of the assignment in a little bit more detail. So we mentioned then that word audit. Doesn't have to be anything formal, not expecting you to carry out research in your setting, not expecting you to go in to observe practice in other classes to find out what is going well. Realistically, you have got a gut feeling, anecdotal evidence as to what is good, what is effective in your setting. That realistically is what you're going to be asked to discuss. So you have got 500 words, as we said, to introduce yourself and the setting and the kind of context in which you are working. And the second part, then you've got 2,000 words here where you will talk about some of the issues that are on the grid below. And again, when we see the grid, there's quite a lot to fit in to the grid if you filled it in using the columns. However, taking those subheadings from it might be a really useful way to think about how to structure your discussion. Now, in terms of how many things you want to talk about as being effective and then could be built up to being excellent, the guidance says you can choose up to 3 themes. So if you choose one theme, then you've got 2,000 words to work through it. If you pick 2 themes, you've got 1,000 words. If you pick 3 themes, you've got about 666 words. So there is a consideration there in terms of, is 3 too many? Because I don't necessarily have the time to go through things in great breadth or depth. Is 1 too few? So entirely up to you as to what you feel is more appropriate there. Last year, people submitted assignments that talked about either 1, 2, or 3 themes, and there were advantages and disadvantages in terms of each of those. So just to give you an idea, and these are only ideas and these are not limited at all, some of the things that you might want to talk about as being effective in your practice if applicable. So you might be aware that person-centered practices have been embedded well across your setting. Or there might be effective practice that you're aware of, excuse me, linked to collaboration or partnership working. Or universal learning provision is really good. Or there are some examples of really effective targeted learning provision. Or potentially staff attitudes and understandings are really effective in terms of putting inclusion into practice. Or the school is very aware of that graduated response to learning provision. So just some ideas there realistically as to what you could talk about. And again, what you will talk about will be what's relevant to your setting. So looking at this grid that's been mentioned, realistically, there are 5 columns, so 5 subheadings to think about. So you are going to be asked to provide some evidence of effective practice. So in other words, introduce what area it is that you're talking about. You will give a brief rationale, in other words, outlining why this is an important, appropriate area of practice. You will go through and tell me as the reader what the strengths are within this effective practice, and also what you feel could be improved to take it from effective and good to excellent. You will set yourself some targets, or set your setting some targets in terms of how you might make that jump from effective and good to excellent. And you might also talk about some of the next steps that are necessary. So you've set yourself a target that all learners will have a 1-page profile by the end of, or by the start of January 2025, rather than just those with ALN, for example. Okay, so why is that appropriate? What's going well in terms of 1-page profiles at the moment, but what could be improved? So your target currently would be along the lines of, our ALN learners have a 1-page profile, but it would be useful to have all learners in a 1-page profile. And then you can talk about the barriers and challenges and how you might meet those targets in practice. Okay, so hopefully taking a look in your own time at what's in that grid, they will give you a bit of an idea as to how you might want to structure this. So underneath here, what I've done is take the kind of headings from those columns and kind of set out, not a template as such, but how realistically you could outline that discussion. Okay, so I won't read that to you, but take a look at that in your own time. So that again is guidance. It's one way that you might want to approach the assignment. So that's the first part. The second part of the assignment then is asking you to do a presentation. And the presentation will be 12 minutes in length, and as we said before, equivalent to 1,500 words. Now, we won't be counting up how many words you say in your presentation. We won't be counting up how many words you have on your slide. So the key metric we will be looking at here realistically is 12 minutes. Now, again, you do have some tolerance here in the fact that your presentation can be either plus or minus 10% under or over in terms of time. And looking at that, in reality, the acceptable time limit for your presentation is somewhere between 10 minutes, 48 seconds and 13 minutes, 12 seconds. So as long as your presentation is within those kind of cut-off points, then it's within the plus or minus 10% tolerance. Okay. Those of you that did the Leadership Management of ALN module last term, you will have been asked to do a similar presentation before. Those of you who did the Inclusive Classroom Practice module, you didn't have to. But in terms of this, you would be expected that you would have a PowerPoint, as we said before, somewhere between 4 and 8 slides, and then outside of that number, a title page and a reference list. You will be expected to record your presentation, and again, we will talk about this closer to the time, but there are a number of ways that you could do this. So you could do this like we're doing this afternoon, for example, in terms of setting up a Teams or a Zoom meeting, sharing your PowerPoint on screen, and then presenting it like I'm talking to you now, so that you can be seen in the corner of the screen. Alternatively, if you'd prefer to use PowerPoint, you can use the record presentation function in PowerPoint, and you will crop up at the side of your presentation, similar to what we're doing now. So the key thing is you need to be visible on screen when you're presenting. It's perfectly fine that you write yourself a script and you read that script as you go through. That is not a problem. You're not expected to kind of present off the cuff. But again, the key thing is you must be visible. It isn't just an audio voiceover. Okay, so in terms of the presentation, what is it you've got to talk about and how much time should you spend on each of those sections? So what I've suggested here in the bold text is realistically your presentation will have 3 sections. So your first section will be a general overview of findings from the audit. In other words, a brief summary of some of the key points that came out of part 1 of the assignment. You will then be asked to think about what are the key challenges to whole setting approaches, and then thinking about the skills or strategies needed to overcome those challenges and engage with and challenge key stakeholders. Thinking about how that might equate into timings, and again, this is just rough guidance. For your 12 minutes, potentially you might spend 30 seconds or so introducing yourself and the presentation. I would say part A, your general overview of findings from the audit would be somewhere between 2.5 to 3 minutes. Potentially you're spending 4.5 minutes then thinking about the challenges to whole setting approaches, and then 4.5 minutes thinking about reflecting on the skills and actions and strategies needed to challenge and engage key stakeholders. And again, in terms of the presentation, this will be included on the same document as part 1, and you will put this as a hyperlink. Okay, it doesn't really matter, as I said, how you record yourself on this, as long as you are visible, as long as we can hear you, and as long as tutor, I am able to access and open what it is you've shared. Okay, so again, we'll talk about that closer to the time and thinking about where you save your presentation. Do you need to update the settings so that other people like me can see it, for example? So we've gone through the presentation, we've gone through part A, the audit. Just wanted to show you a little bit again then of what you will see on a weekly basis on Canvas. So again, like in your first module, I will set up kind of a weekly page with some prompts about what it is the purpose of the week will be and what it is that you could / should be doing in terms of managing your time. And then for this week, I've put on here some examples. So the PowerPoint that I went through earlier on, the recording of the session, I will upload this onto that point later on. And then I mentioned earlier that there was a Padlet on Canvas that I'd like you to, over the next week and a half or so, post some comments on if you don't mind doing. So 4 sections realistically. Brief outline, who am I? So my name is Di and I work in such and such type of setting. What is it that you're hoping to get out of studying the module? Do you have any comments or concerns that this early point that we can then look to support going forward? And then in particular, in terms of the optional module drop-in and the optional assignment drop-in sessions, are there particular days and times that work best for you? So August might be a little bit more open, but I am aware that that does impede on your school holidays. So in particular, between now and the school's breaking up, I think that's the 19th of July, roughly, are there particular days and times that work better for you? And what I'll aim to do is put a timetable of least worst days together. So it may be, for example, that on one week we meet at 4:30 on a Tuesday, but the next session, people seem to say that 6 p.m. on a Thursday works better. So we will kind of mix and match those as best we can to try and make sure everyone's got equivalent access to those sessions. So realistically, that's what we've got on Canvas. So you will see these weekly prompts that I will make available to you. Again, they will have that overview and to-do list. These very much are just kind of logistical checking in. The aim for this week is to work through PebblePad in your own time, or the aim for this week is to work through PebblePad in your own time, but we also have a drop-in session on this date, and here is the link to that. Okay. In terms of the drop-in sessions, I know we've used Zoom this afternoon. Potentially, if you would prefer to use Teams as the medium for those sessions going forward, again, going back to that Padlet, could you please let me know whether you would prefer Zoom or Teams? So I know at Swansea we tend to use Zoom more, but potentially through work you might have better access to Teams, and the National Conference Saturdays are also on Teams as well, so you might prefer to use Teams going forward. I'm happy either way. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing at that point. I'm also going to stop the recording.